Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jacob McQuire. And we witnessed something this past Sunday night that had been done before. And there's the common saying that imitation is the best form of flattery. And Jamar Chase wiped the football with his towel as almost if he was wiping a child's buttocks. And what's interesting is, as Panthers fans, this was something Steve Smith had done in a Panthers jersey. And it was, I believe, against the Falcons at home. It was in the 2000s. I want to say might have been 2006, 2007 when it happened. And it was iconic. Every time he scored a touchdown, he had a new dance. It was like his thing. And that was one of the more iconic moments. So we thought to start the show, since Steve Smith is a Panther and we didn't have a game to cover in terms of a recap, that we should talk about the top 5 Steve Smith moments in our opinion. So I don't know if you want to kick off the segment or talk about a moment that really made you appreciate Steve Smith when you grew up watching the Panthers.
For sure. Jamar Chase wiped the baby, changed the diaper, whatever you want to say. And a lot of people on Twitter and social media were like, what is he doing? This is new and crazy. This is a cool celebration. And I was just thinking, you guys are just exposing yourselves. Did you not watch Steve Smith? He had one of these every other week, it seemed like. And you're right. Like, we wanted to look at the best Steve Smith celebration moments. You could do some stuff he did on the field too, but Steve Smith was a real character, right? And I think that when people look back on Steve Smith, it's not his performances they talk about, even though he's like up there in receiving yards. I believe he's top 10. I think he's 8. Had a triple crown one year. Like, he was a performer, but he was also an entertainer. And so I think we got to start with, when we're looking at our top 5 favorite Steve Smith kind of celebration moments, Ice Up Son. That's number one, right? Whenever you're wearing the Ice Up Son shirt, that's like the main thing I think of when I think of Smitty. He's like my favorite player before Cam Newton came to the Panthers. And it's like, it's his mantra, right? You hear Ice Up Son, it's Steve Smith. It's like pretty self-explanatory. And I think it has to be number one for that reason.
Yeah. All 5 of our selections had to be games in which the Panthers won. And this performance, the top one that we have, because of the iconic saying "Ice Up Son," it's there. His performance on the field really didn't match some of the other performances we'll talk about. He had 4 receptions, 62 yards, but this is a guy that bullied Aqib Talib all night. And the saying was fitting. It was a very gritty win. Cam Newton had a highlight run. Greg Olsen, Ted Ginn had touchdowns that game. It was just a all-round team effort. So he didn't necessarily take over the game, but he dictated a large portion of it by pretty much bullying their cornerback one and setting the tone for the game.
Yeah, and there was also no pass interference at the end there. There was like really good coverage by the Panthers defense in the end zone there. So that was a really good moment. And it's iconic for Steve Smith, right? Probably his most iconic play, though, comes against the Rams in the playoffs in double overtime. Ex-Clown, 6 receptions, 163 yards, and a touchdown that game to win the Panthers a pretty exciting and hype playoff game. I believe this was 04. No, excuse me, 05. 04?
Yeah, it would have been January of 2000.
Yeah.
It was the 2003 season.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. But like, that's far and away to me Steve Smith's most iconic play. And he actually recently talked about this with Julian Edelman on Edelman's podcast. You wrote it down, Games with Names. They had a little bit of interesting banter there. Talked about where Steve Smith might have ended up after he left the Panthers, how it kind of messed with Edelman's free agency decisions, and just a neat thing to kind of relive as one of the better moments in Panthers history.
Oh yeah, no, it was really reminiscent of a lot of different things that we were aware of from the public side, but hearing some of this backside story and banter really kind of clued you in that Dave Gettleman was kind of done with Steve Smith being a part of the team well before he was actually cut from the team. So that was an interesting kind of moment to kind of hear about and learn. And going back to that St. Louis Rams game, because that I think the reason why that moment sticks out the most is that set the tone for us going to the first ever Super Bowl. And Steve Smith had a touchdown in that Super Bowl. He was a big impact player throughout the entire playoffs that year. And it was just so fun to watch the Cardiac Cats and him be a part of that. And at the third spot we have is actually another playoff performance, another divisional round game. And it came 2 years later when he won the Triple Crown in the regular season, leading in receptions, yards, and touchdowns. And in the game in particular, we had gotten kind of stomped against Chicago earlier in the year, didn't have a lot of offensive production. And I believe it was the second play from scrimmage. Jake Delhomme did a little pump fake, and Steve Smith streaking down the sideline, scores the touchdown to open the game up. And it just kept on going from there. He ended the game with 12 receptions, 218 yards, and 2 touchdowns, a celebration that Antonio Brown has copied during his kind of NFL career, was sliding down the goalpost. That was something that Steve Smith did. I'm sure other players have done that before, but it was just a very iconic playoff moment that, again, put us in the NFC Championship game. And that was the interesting part. Up until that point in the Panthers' history, we had only been to the NFC Championship game back in '96. And now with Steve Smith and Jake Delhomme, we went to 2 NFC Championship games within a 3-year span. And it gave life to this team, this city, this franchise, and he was a big reason why.
For sure, only one NFC Championship appearance since then. Obviously, it was the win with Cam Newton there. Number 4, it wasn't a Panthers moment per se, but it was when Steve Smith was on the Ravens playing against the Panthers when he absolutely torched us in the homecoming for 7 receptions, 139 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And after the game, they like to talk to Steve Smith because he's an entertainer. And I can't remember who the sideline reporter was, but she handed him the mic and he was talking and all the stuff. And at the very end, he's like, and if you see any of the Panthers, tell them to mow my lawn, because obviously he had just left. He still had a house in the Carolinas. He lives here now because a lot of former Panthers do live here, but he had to disrespect us a little bit and it hurt. But I think the message rang through Panthers fans, and maybe it got in the ears of Dave Gettleman. Who knows? Like Gettleman was used to getting rid of franchise, but like beholden players we as fans like Josh Norman, thinking as the main one, gave him the franchise tag and then took it away.
D'Angelo Williams, he was a little bit older, but yeah.
Gettleman's done quite a number on a couple franchises. We'll talk about the other one later, but it was just a cool return for him and to get the win over his former team. I'm sure that felt great for Steve Smith, but for fans of the Panthers, it didn't feel as good.
No, and leading up to the game, he said, "Put your goggles on because it's going to be blood and guts." Like, he called it. That was the cool thing about Steve Smith. Like, he talked trash, but he backed it up. I mean, they go into that game, completely dominate us. He had both touchdowns in the first half. The first one was off a ricochet, but the second one, he just straight up mossed the guy that committed pass interference, and it didn't matter. So again, iconic player through and through. And I think when we talk about trash talking, the 5th and final best performance, and I think it's fitting that it's here, is the Love Boat scandal. And Fred Smoot's covering Steve Smith. The Vikings came to town, and Steve Smith put on an ass whooping. We're talking 11 receptions, 201 yards, a touchdown. His touchdown celebration obviously being the boat. And Fred Smoot was pretty much a moot point at that point afterwards. So end of his NFL career, this is somebody who's punched and broken a teammate's nose in practice, broken his arm in scoring a touchdown. Like, this guy is hard as nails. And his career from start to finish was absolutely amazing. And he should have been a first ballot Hall of Famer. He still deserves to be a Hall of Famer. And it's just great to see that towards the end of his career, he started getting the national media attention he deserved. Because like you said at the top of this, not only did he produce really, really legendary numbers, he was an entertainer through and through.
Yeah, hopefully now that Julius Peppers has gotten in, I believe Luke Kuechly is eligible this year for the Hall of Fame. Maybe we can get some more Panthers recognition and finally get Smitty into the Hall of Fame where he belongs. I can't believe some of the receivers that have made it in over him, but I think that is a moot point, like Fred Smoot. But you mentioned him breaking his arm on a touchdown, and that was against the New York Giants. And I think that's a good segue into around the NFL because while, like you said, we didn't have a Panthers game to cover, there has been some news over the past couple of days before we hopped on to record that I think is pretty significant. And the first part is with the New York Giants. Daniel Jones has finally been benched. I said it back when we did. I think it was the NFC East like preview episode when Colin came on for that one. I said my take was Daniel Jones isn't going to finish the year, mainly because of the injury guarantee in his contract. If he gets injured, the rest of it's guaranteed. His contract, as we know, was pretty expensive, and the Giants definitely don't want to pay that. So they benched him, brought in Tommy DeVito, like the Italian stallion, fan favorite. He's going to be the starter, not Drew Lock. And I think they're trying to buy goodwill from the fan base for a team that I believe, because they just had their bye week, they are 2-8 as well. 2-8, tied for second worst in the league. Obviously, the Jaguars are the worst team. The Panthers curse strikes again, I guess, even though it was over the bye week. Seems like every time we beat someone as of late, they either fire a coach or get rid of a prominent player. And this time it was the QB.
Well, if a dysfunctional team and franchise that we've discussed at length and ad nauseum beats you, then I think that's a reflection of just how poor things are going in your own building. So in this case, Daniel Jones, obviously a couple years ago, gets a $160 million deal over 4 years. I think it was very comparable to the Derek Carr deal we saw down in New Orleans and some of these other, like, I don't want to say like where it's obviously an acknowledgement from the market that this is an elite guy, but it wasn't the balance that teams have now found with Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield of like probably that $30 million range. And if Daniel Jones got that, it's definitely an overpay, but it's not as an egregious as a $40 million bill. In the case of the Giants, like you said, with that injury protection, that injury guarantee, what's going on is very similar to Russell Wilson last year. The only difference is there are a lot of outs in Daniel Jones' contracts. So them cutting him this offseason, they'll incur about $20 million in dead cap. The Broncos, even though they avoided all those injury guarantees, still had like $85 million in dead cap because of how big the deal was they signed Russ to and the guaranteed money that was in that contract. So a little bit different. The Giants have pretty much given themselves an out with there, and they'll be starting from ground one. So the question is, will Brian Dable and Joe Shine be part of that rebuild? Are they going to chase after their quarterback one in this upcoming draft? There's a lot of stuff to follow and repercussions from this benching, but it had to happen. This is a team that has only had, I think, one winning season over the past 5 years, and they had a lot of luck that year. So trying to actually build a contender is the issue currently for the Giants.
And it's interesting, right? The one good year they did have, they met the Vikings in the playoffs, 13-4 Vikings. They ended up winning that game. But the direction that each of those franchises has taken since then couldn't be more drastic, I think. Like the Vikings, their GM Kwesi understood, like, hey, we weren't a 13-win team in the traditional sense. We got really lucky. Our point differential actually hovered around 0. Our EPA was right in the middle of the pack. We are not a true powerhouse team, so he can't act like it. So he went out, traded, and got the QB of the future. Obviously, JJ McCarthy isn't playing this year, but at least he secured that. He traded up and got an edge rusher. He's gotten all these pieces around the QB to like have them be successful throughout. And look at him now. Even with Sam Darnold, I believe the Vikings are 8-2. Really competent team. Then you look at the Giants, where I think it was 2 off seasons ago, right? They had a choice to make. It was Saquon, who is like the fan favorite in New York, or Daniel Jones. And they're like, oh, well, we can't franchise tag Daniel Jones and pay Saquon, so we got to pay Daniel Jones, right? No, you don't have to pay Daniel Jones. He had one good year ever in his career, and they just made the wrong choice. And now look what Saquon Barkley is doing with the Eagles. He would be far and away the touchdown leader in the league if when he got down at the 1, Jalen Hurts was a good teammate and was like, here, I'll just hand it to you instead of vulturing your touchdowns. That's a little bit of a fantasy football complaint from me, a Saquon Barkley holder. But yeah, like Daniel Jones, I think we knew that this was coming. And I guess my question to you is, you talked about how Russ moved on from Denver, and you see the success he's found in Pittsburgh and the success that Denver has had this year. Do you think Daniel Jones can get any of that? Or do you think like he's going to be a backup or maybe a Taysom Hill kind of guy later in his career? Because he can run, and I think he's probably not as strong or as stocky, but he could catch some passes like little curl routes like Taysom Hill. What do you think is the future for Daniel Jones?
I love that you bring up his athleticism. I think a lot of people don't talk enough about it, and maybe some analysts do, some don't. But I think when you have a player with his athletic capability, someone who has run a pro-style offense. It's all going to come back to, can he get in a situation like Russell Wilson and Justin Fields got into this offseason? And that's finding a competent franchise. Like, how many Mike Tomlins are out there, and how many of those head coaches need a quarterback? And if the answer is none, then Daniel Jones, like, next stop is just going to be a backup somewhere. And that's just the reality.
There could be one down in Jacksonville if the rumors of a Belichick takeover are going to come to fruition this offseason, but they just pay Trevor Lawrence.
They just, no, Trevor Lawrence would be part of that future. Yeah. I mean, there's too much guaranteed money locked up into that. They just signed him this past offseason. So I don't think that's a direction they could go. But again, it would be finding a team that needs a quarterback that has a competent front office and coaching staff. I just don't think there are enough of those right now where he's going to be able to slot into a starting role. So I don't see him being in a situation like Russ has found himself this year. So that's just kind of how I see it. I don't know if he'll find a resurgence somewhere like Ryan Tannehill did when he left Miami and went to Tennessee. There could be a surprise landing spot for him in that way, in that regard. So that would be the kind of thing to keep an eye on for. But I don't really see his career taking off from here.
For sure. I know a lot of people are talking about Vrabel being the leader for the Raiders job. If that comes open, maybe he could find his Tannehill and Daniel Jones there. The other New York or New Jersey team, I should say, I don't want to disparage the Bills, who are a good organization right now. The New York Jets also are in the news this morning. We're recording on a Tuesday. They finally got rid of Joe Douglas. And a lot of people are saying, why are you doing this now? Yada, yada, yada. It gives them time to search for a new head coach or a new general manager, sooner. Obviously, they can't talk to anybody who's currently on an NFL team right now because the season is ongoing. They can talk to former GMs, former front office people, like a Bill Belichick, if that's the route they're going to go. But Belichick was a New York Jet for, 20 hours and decided not to be. So not sure if that's the direction they're going to go in. But Joe Douglas, I know both of us are not fans of his resume. I have some of the stuff here, wrote down his highlights, so to speak, 30-64 during his tenure as the New York Jets general manager. Only one good draft class, and in that class, they had 3 first-rounders. It was really hard to mess up. They picked Sauce Gardner, I believe, 4th overall in that class. Garrett Wilson was 10th, I think, in that 10, 8 through 12, somewhere in that range. Other than that, not great drafts. Picked up Mekhi Becton. Didn't work out there, but now he's super good with Philly. In free agency, his free agency choices were not great either. Corey Davis, they gave a big deal to. He retired, I think, a year after that deal. Alan Lazard has not worked out. Tyron Smith has not worked out. And Carl Lawson was the other big free agent for them, but he got hurt pretty soon after they signed him. He's been more active in the trade market. And let's look at some of his trade history. I think those are the big ones. Aaron Rodgers.
We'll give Joe Douglas his props. He had highway robbery when it came to shipping Sam Darnold to Carolina. But outside of that, get into the more recent trades. I don't want to completely tarnish his whole resume. He did get a lot of picks for Sam Darnold, who ended up really being a bum for us. And I'm glad that he's at least in a starting role in Minnesota, but he hasn't looked good the past few weeks.
I'm not going to give anyone credit for winning a trade against Scott Fitterer. That's just how it is. Even the Bears, I'm not giving them credit for that because what are they doing right now, right? So the Darnold trade was a steal. I will give him that. But the other trades, Rodgers has not worked out. Obviously, as soon as they trade for him, 4 snaps in, Achilles tear. You can't really blame Joe Douglas for that. But this year, their team with Aaron Rodgers is worse at this point than it was last year with Zach Wilson. At this point, they had won 4 games last year. They are 3-8 now. 3-8. They would have to win 4 more games to even tie what they did last year. Traded for Hassan Reddick, who didn't play for the first 6 or 7 weeks. Had to get new representation in there for Reddick to get him to play, get him to suit up. Then the Devontae Adams trade this year hasn't gone as expected. It hasn't given the boost to the offense that I guess the team thought that would come with it right after they fired Robert Saleh, who when he was the head coach, they had won more games than it has been since they fired him. So I think this was overdue for Joe Douglas. Not a lot of wins during his tenure with the Jets, and I think quite a bit overrated given I believe he came from the Eagles front office, and everybody thought this is going to be Howie Roseman. He has some Howie Roseman in him. It just didn't work out that way. There aren't a lot of Howie Rosemans in the league.
No, and having an owner that's willing to spend at certain points and be able to push the can down the road and do it in a smart way. And the Jets are just not smart from top to bottom. Jason at Over the Cap, this was kind of his statement, his tweet about the situation is, yes, firing coaches and general managers can get you an early start of sorts, going back to your point of like, okay, they can start looking at people who are former general managers or are currently available and not on a staff, but goes on to say that most of the people you will be hiring are all working for another team right now. I think this is one that just makes the team look bad since there are only 7 weeks left in the year, and it serves no purpose other than getting a headline. Like, this is just going back to the whole drama and hoopla that has become the Jets. And the owner, Woody Johnson, it's Aaron Rodgers, and nothing's working. You fire your head coach, you fire your general manager. Your defense has gotten worse since the head coach firing. This isn't doing anything in terms of a morale boost for the team, because outside of your superstars who have guaranteed money in your contracts, you have other players that are vying for a roster spot, are trying to boost their resume. And with kind of that instability, you don't know if you're going to be a Jet next year. You may be somewhere else. And that's just, it creates this insecurity in the locker room that doesn't need to be there. And that's frustrating. And I don't see it really changing anytime soon, because again, it starts from the top and has trickled down to the bottom.
For sure. And you talk about it starting at the top with the owner, Woody Johnson. The last time Donald Trump was president back in the 2016 through 2020 range, he had Woody Johnson as one of our foreign ambassadors. I believe it was to the United Kingdom. If Trump's going to ask him to do that again, and he has to take time away from the Jets, there's just going to be even more instability coming down from the top there all the way down to the roster. And with Aaron Rodgers kind of doing his hostile takeover, he said he might play again next year. Like, this is looking like it's the end of the Packers tenure. I might want to play for the Packers, but I don't know yet. And so that drug out into the summer when he did his whole retreat in the abyss. So I'm pretty worried for the future of the Jets here. If I were them, I would just not re-sign Rodgers. I think this is the last year of his deal, right? Or no, they restructured it, didn't they? To give him an extra year. I think you got to just cut loose ends. And if you end up with one of those high picks and you really believe Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, Jalen Milroe, Garrett Nussmeier, one of those guys is the future. I mean, New York is a big market, right? You can get some star power and some hype in there if you get a QB. If the new guy thinks that's the way to go, I think they have to start all the way over with some of the pieces they have around there, like Garrett Wilson. Maybe not even Sauce Gardner, because you saw what Patrick Surtain just got paid. Are they going to be willing to pay that for a team that's starting over? I don't know.
And in his recent podcast, Jason Fitzgerald kind of brought that up. And it's more like, why not try to liquidate some of these assets, get like first round picks back, and then use that to rebuild the team? Because it doesn't make sense right now to go pay Sauce when you're in a rebuild mode. Now, granted, if they're able to kind of cut some dead weight with Devontae Adams, Hassan Reddick, Aaron Rodgers in the next little bit, that's going to free up some money for when those higher cap hits would hit for a Sauce Gardner extension. But again, when you're in the middle of rebuild, it doesn't necessarily make sense to do that. So we'll see kind of the direction the Jets are going to go in the offseason. Clearly, their playoff aspirations fell flat. I know I had them missing the playoffs. I believe you had them missing the playoffs as well.
Yes.
So we didn't have high expectations for this team in a loaded conference coming into the year. And they've not only missed those expectations, they've definitely underwhelmed exceedingly. So with that, we're going to transition into the final segment for the day. And that's just breaking down kind of the playoff picture from where we saw it before the season started to where we think it's going to end up at the end of the year. Do you want to kind of kick off with the AFC? And if so, were there any discrepancies from the preseason number 1 seed and your current number 1 seed?
As far as number 1 seed, no. I had the Chiefs at number 1. I'm not going to doubt them until they give me reason to, right? I currently have them number 1 as well. I know the Bills just beat them, so they have the head-to-head tiebreaker there. But the Bills also have one more loss than the Chiefs. And I don't know, like, it just takes the Bills to lose one more time and the Chiefs can run the table. I'm never going to doubt them again until they give me a reason to. And they have given a little bit of reason so far. They struggled a bit on offense at times. Like, they've required voodoo, black magic, whatever they need to do to get some of these wins. So maybe they'll slip up down the stretch. Maybe this week in particular, hopefully they'll slip up down the stretch. But I still have them as my number 1 seed. It looks like you do as well. What was different for me was the number 2 seed in particular. What I thought would be the winner of the AFC North has gone out the window. I thought the Bengals would come in and with their offensive firepower get it done and win a lot of games. And with their offense, they are getting it done, but the defense isn't holding up. And Trey Hendrickson's doing his part. I think he still leads the league in sacks, given that he got, I think, 1.5 against the Chargers on Sunday night. But the rest of the defense isn't there. They're getting torched. Joe Burrow took a while to come along at the start of the year, as he always does, because it seems every training camp he is always injured. And now the Bengals are really on the outside looking in. I don't see it for them to make the playoffs even. I have the Steelers currently winning that division and the Ravens as a wild card team. So it's going to be rough for them there. 3 and 4, I have the Bills and Texans. I had them I have the Bills at 2 right now and the Texans at 4. Had those as preseason winners. I think both of us did. Not a lot of surprises there. And then as far as the wild cards go, had the Ravens, but I also had the Browns, who have severely disappointed, and the Dolphins, who I think, given the Tua injury, there's a reason they cratered. Right now I have the Chargers and Broncos making the playoffs, which I didn't think would happen. I thought the Chargers would have a really high draft pick, and the Broncos defense has really surprised me and come along. So I think we're really going to get a loaded AFC West playoff picture, AFC North, like as usual with those teams. And then the Bills will obviously rake in their division. But the Texans are the interesting one to me. We saw last night them kind of thrash the Cowboys on paper. Like, I feel like the box score wasn't close, but the Cowboys just kept moving the ball in the game, and then they would stall out once they got close to the red zone, or they would fake a punt for some reason and that wouldn't work, or there'd be a turnover. I think the Texans are vulnerable, but I don't have faith in anyone else in that division to take advantage of it. So that's kind of where I have it right now. Chiefs, Bills, Steelers, Texans, Ravens, Chargers, Broncos.
Yeah. No, and I want to kind of concur. I had the Chiefs at the number 1 seed in the preseason, still have them there until they prove that they aren't the best team. Yes, did they just suffer a loss on the road? It was a close game. It went back and forth. The Bills have beaten the Chiefs in the regular season before, only to lose in the postseason. So until we see that narrative switch, I'm very confident in saying the Chiefs are number 1. Now, I think what I've learned throughout the course of this season is the Bills kind of had a lean off season, kind of like the Chiefs did 2 years ago before they went on and won their second Super Bowl before going back to back. And the Bills got lean, and they've had one of the best starts that they've had during the McDermott and Bean era, the Josh Allen experience that has been part of the Buffalo Bills culture turnaround, because it was abysmal before those people got in the building. And I thought this would be a year where they won the division. They played in a poor division, but they'd be like the 4 seed. I thought the Texans were more complete. I thought the Ravens were more complete. And I think if the Bills and Ravens went head to head, the Ravens may still kind of pull it off like they did earlier in the year. They just have the ability to create certain mismatches on offense that are hard on that Bills defense as it's currently constructed. But with that being said, I think the Bills are just going to keep churning out wins. I think they get the number 2 seed this year. And the Ravens, I still believe in them. They're going on a little bit of skid. They did this at the beginning of the year before rattling off a bunch of wins. I think they're going to rally it, win the division. They still have one more game against the Steelers. It'll be in Baltimore this time. And I think that'll be a huge plus for them. At 4, it's the Texans. I had them at the 3 seed during the preseason, and they've kind of underwhelmed. The defense has played great, but the offense is kind of stopped at times. It's not really a succinct mechanism that we thought going into the year. And I think a large part of that is, yes, Nico Collins gets hurt. Stephon Diggs gets hurt. And what I want to throw out there real quick, because I wasn't a big fan of the Stephon Diggs trade. I thought he was older. It's a 1-year rental. The trade that the Texans used to pretty much trade back necessarily out of the first round to then trade the second to the Vikings. The pick that Brian Thomas was selected with was the Houston Texans pick. They could have had Brian Thomas and Nico Collins. Imagine Nico Collins gets hurt and you still have Brian Thomas on the outside. And that's why draft capital is important. And if you wanted to use those resources on a wide receiver, use it on a LSU wide receiver. That's the moral of the story here. But moving past the Texans, I think, again, this is sophomore slump, just struggles that they're working through, especially with personnel being out. But going into the wild card, I think it's going to be the Steelers, and I had the Steelers in my preseason one. It's going to be the Chargers. I'm going to go Broncos. I think the Broncos are going to be able to kind of get in above some of these other teams that are vying for the playoffs in the AFC. I'm trying to remember who's at 5-6 and knocking on the door right behind them. I believe it might be an AFC North team. It may be another AFC. Actually, no, it's not. It's not AFC South. Actually, it is AFC South.
It's the Colts, I believe.
It is the Indianapolis Colts that are kind of knocking on the door. And I love Anthony Richardson. I love Shane Steichen. I just don't know if they have enough horses on defense to kind of really keep pace down the stretch. And we'll see if that's the case. But the way the cards fall right now, I think two teams from the AFC West are in the wild card. The only team that I kind of missed on were the Jacksonville Jaguars. I thought they would be a wild card team. They would be healthy. They'd be able to kind of find their footing. They're one of the worst teams in the NFL right now. And I did think the Cincinnati Bengals would sneak in as the 7th seed. And they very well might. If they run the tables at the end of the year, they win out, there's a chance. But their schedule is not as forgiving playing in the AFC North. And that's going to come around and bite them for losing games like the New England Patriots early on in the year and not being able to pull off the upset or come back against the Chargers this past Sunday. It's games and moments like that that are going to haunt them going into this coming offseason. So I think that wraps up the AFC kind of playoff picture. Again, for me, it's Chiefs at 1, Bills at 2, Ravens at 3, Texans at 4. At 5, it'll be the Steelers, and then it'll go Chargers and Broncos.
Yeah, you talk about the Jags and the Bengals. Obviously, we know the Jags are in hot water. You said they're one of the worst. They're actually the worst in terms of record. I think roster-wise, they probably aren't as bad as like the Panthers or the Patriots, but they've underwhelmed for sure. And then the Bengals, I think when we talk about coaches that are on the hot seat, that could be a sneaky one for Zach Taylor if they end up like 5-12 or something like that, because like you said, their schedule not as forgiving, even with the numbers they're putting up on offense. So we're actually pretty even on the AFC. The only difference we have is we're swapping the wild card and the winner of the AFC North. So that's fun there. We're also pretty close on the NFC. Actually, wow, exactly the same except for the winner of the NFC West. I'll kick us off. I had the Lions at the 1 seed to start the year. They're the team I have picking to win the Super Bowl. I'm still there. I think they're the best team in football right now. You just can't keep talking about them. They put up like 50 every week. Number 2 seed right now, I have the Eagles. I had them at 3 to start the year. Really strong right now. They've come on after a slow start to the year. I think they've won 5 in a row now, and they just beat the Commanders on primetime on Thursday night, and they're really like tightening the grip on the division there. At 3, I think the Cardinals are actually going to ride it out and keep control of this division. I know that it's going to be like a bloodbath with them. I think everybody's either 6-4 or 5-5 in that group between them, the Niners, the Rams, and the Seahawks. It's going to be close, but I think what they can do with Kyler and the run game on offense and Marvin Harrison Jr. finally coming along, building a rapport with them, they're going to be tough to beat. The Falcons winning the NFC South, regrettably. Here's the thing. We aren't that far off from winning the division. We're only 3 games back, so it could happen with us. And given what my perfect take is this week, I'll get a little more into that, but it could be us. That's all I'm saying. Wild card, I have Washington Commanders at the 5 seed. They were not even close to my radar to start the year, but they've really proven themselves. Jaden Daniels, before the rib injury, was lighting the world up. He's cooled off a bit. Hopefully he can be healthy down the stretch. And then 6 and 7, I have the Green Bay Packers and Minnesota Vikings. I would have them above the Commanders. I think they're a better team. I think they play better, but they have to play each other and Detroit. Like there's just too much fighting within the division there that I think that they're going to give each other losses and let a team like Washington, who doesn't have to worry about the Cowboys, doesn't have to worry about the Giants, slip ahead of them to that 5 seed. And before the season started, I had most of the same teams. I had the Niners win the division. Obviously, I didn't know McCaffrey was going to miss most of the year. It looks like their morale is shaken across the Niners, like they're tired of losing all the time. I had the Cowboys. Horrible prediction by me. I've atoned for that by saying they're going to go 7-10 or worse. And I had the Seattle Seahawks, who very well still could win their division. And I know you want to talk about that a little bit when you list your teams. But for me, it's Detroit at 1, Philly at 2, Arizona Cardinals 3, Falcons 4. Then in the wild card, Washington Commanders, Green Bay Packers, and Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah. And for the most part, my rankings are going to look very similar. What I will say about the Detroit Lions, and the reason why I have them as the 1 seed, is because of their dominant at-home performances. Obviously, they have the massacre down in Dallas, but that's a revenge game from last year. Most of these just scoring entourages are going on at home. And that's very reminiscent to how the end of 2015 went for the Panthers. We were dropping 30 and 40 pieces. It felt like every home game we were almost shutting out the opponent. It wasn't close. And I mean, you could go down the list of games that year, and it didn't matter who came into town. If it was a division rival, a good team, a bad team, they were getting the doors blown off them, and there wasn't anything they could do about it. And that's how I feel about the Lions right now. They're just that good. They have answers on both sides of the ball. They haven't skipped a beat with Aiden Hutchinson out. I'm not saying the Jaguars aren't a bad team right now, and Mac Jones necessarily isn't the answer at quarterback. But when all you can muster for 60 minutes against a defense that, again, doesn't have Aiden, doesn't really, outside of, I would say, Brian Branch, have like this elite playmaker on that side of the ball, they allow 6 points. And like, that's insane. Like, to be able to be that dominant on both sides of the ball is absolutely phenomenal. They deserve the number 1 seed. I think they're going to get it. They're going to lock up the NFC North. In my preseason prediction, I thought the Eagles would take the number 1 seed. They're definitely going to be close. And the reason why I thought the Eagles would pull it off initially is because of how much of a bloodbath the NFC North would be. But that really doesn't seem to phase the Detroit Lions. I think they're going to be dominant the rest of the way. And it's going to be fun to watch them on Thanksgiving. It's not usually the game to look forward to on Thanksgiving, but I'm excited to see the Detroit Lions play. At the 2 seed, I did have in my preseason predictions, I thought the Packers would pull it off. They have not been able to kind of hit the ground running from where they ended last year in the postseason. And Jordan Love's injury, just being hobbled at the quarterback position, and then still trying to figure some things out on the defensive side. They haven't been as good as what I thought they could be. They're still a good team. They're 7-3. They're going to be a wild card team. I have them as my 6th seed currently. The Eagles I have as my number 2 seed right behind. And then, like you said, I have the Seattle Seahawks winning the NFC West. I think when you're able to go into San Francisco, atone for a loss earlier in the year at home is huge. I think that is a huge momentum shift. And I know a lot of analysts want to dissuade from using momentum and how statistically significant it is. And maybe there is no statistical significance. We can't capture it with the current metrics we have. But having a galvanizing win like that is what's going to help propel you down the stretch. They're a game out of first place. They still have both games against the Cardinals. They have that matchup in Seattle this coming week, and that's going to be huge. I think that's going to be a test for both teams to see who can pull away. Because prior to this week, I thought the Commanders could pull off the NFC East. But with the Eagles now having about a 1.5 game lead, having already won a game against the Commanders, it's going to make it hard for that team to kind of claw back and win the NFC East. The win the NFC South, it's a crapshoot. There's only going to be one team from that division, and it's wins the division. And I could see it being a team with a losing record. I can see 8-9 winning the NFC South this year. And I mean, the performance the Falcons had against the Broncos was probably worse than what the Panthers had in Denver. And that's saying something.
It was
like, yeah. I didn't think the Falcons were a good team coming into the year, and I think the Broncos exposed them. They've been exposed before. Seattle went into Atlanta, beat the brakes off of them. They won a couple lucky games, one against Philadelphia in week 2, and then I think there were a couple other lucky ones against division opponents.
Sold a game as well.
Yeah, I mean that. I'm saying the Buccaneers and the Saints games, like both
Oh,
of
the Saints
those, like
games for sure too. Yeah.
yeah, and it's just I like those kind of situations where it's like, okay, so if they don't win, say those 3 games, this is a team that's in the bottom of the NFC South with everybody else, and you have probably the Buccaneers as the division lead at 4-6. Well, if they win a couple games, they're like 5-5 or 6-4, but like that's kind of the like mindset to think about when you see this Atlanta Falcons team is yes, they're 6-4, but it isn't a good unit. Are they able to pull off a couple wins with their 2-game lead? I think they do. But they'll probably have a first round exit playing the Washington Commanders, who I think are a really, really good team. They obviously have their flaws, but like you said, nobody had the expectation that this would be a good team this year. And a large part of that is because Jaden Daniels, Cliff Kingsbury are putting together something special. Obviously, they've cooled off after a hot start, but I think they're going to find some answers. They aren't going to have nearly as tough a stretch over the next few games, and we'll be able to kind of bundle some wins together and really rally towards the playoffs. At the number 6 seed, I have the Packers, and at the 7th seed, I do think the Vikings squeeze in. Like you said, a lot of wins already. I think they're 8-2. They've put themselves in the driver's seat to where they really only need to win 2 or 3 more games down the stretch, where some of these teams in the NFC West, like the Rams and 49ers, have to be almost flawless to make it to the postseason. And so I'm gonna bank on the better team 10 weeks in, rather than a team that has potential and has been historically good in previous seasons to make a miraculous comeback. So that's how we see the NFC picture playing out. Obviously, it's very similar. The only difference being the Cardinals and Seahawks. Everything else is pretty much the same. Is there anything else you want to add before we get into Purrfect Takes?
Yeah. I think looking at those 4 games that we wanted to highlight last week, the one that really had the most impact on me as far as looking at the playoff picture goes was the Ravens and Steelers. And the reason that I had the Steelers winning the division currently, as opposed to the Ravens, is the Steelers are now 2-0 in the division. Obviously, they have a lot more division games. They have one on Thursday in 2 days, I believe in Cleveland. Yes, in Cleveland. So if they're able to get that win, that's a 3-0 division lead, where the Baltimore Ravens are currently 2-2. And I think that game in particular really made me think, hey, even if these teams end up with the same record, if the Steelers are able to pull off a better division record, it's going to propel them into the top 4 seeds of the playoffs. And like that game for me was the one decider game, so to speak, as far as the playoff picture goes this past weekend. Any games for you that altered your playoff picture?
Well, no, I want to touch on that because I think that's a good point. I think you and I disagree on this, and this is good to kind of have this discrepancy. Is last year the Steelers, I think, almost pulled away into like the first in their division, almost like halfway through the year, and then they lost games that they were supposed to win. That would have almost like locked up the division, put them in the driver's seat for it, and then they got a wild card spot. And so that for me is I'm worried about, does this team start losing games that they aren't supposed to? And maybe they don't. I think Russell Wilson is definitely a huge upgrade to Kenny Pickett. And if he were to go down, I think Justin Fields is still an upgrade over Kenny Pickett. And that being said, I definitely think that they're going to be really, really good. I think the Ravens are going to go on what I said earlier, a stretch and a tear where they just start winning games and they start dominating games. We saw it earlier in the year when they lost games they weren't supposed to against the Raiders. Then we've seen it more recently with the Browns. This just has the feeling of it. It's just a team that's starting to piece it together. And when they need to start winning games right now in November, December, they're going to find a way.
I for sure, I love the Ravens a lot. I think their offense is very explosive. I'm worried about that defense, to be quite honest. I know they held the Steelers to only 18, all field goals, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
But
no touchdowns.
yeah, I'm still worried about that defense. Hopefully Trey White can get healthy and like give them a spark from the DB position. But yeah, like I think that's the division, AFC North, where it could be the Steelers or the Ravens, that really has the most like flexibility, changeability between the winners as far as all the divisions in the league, because I think we can lock in Chiefs, Bills, Texans, Lions, Eagles, and maybe the Falcons are up there too. And then the other one being the Cardinals and Seahawks. And I wanted to bring that up because that game, the Ravens Steelers game, I feel like is going to be a lot like the upcoming Cardinal Seahawks game. Like that's going to change my perspective. Whoever wins it is going to have a really good shot at the division. But I think we are in Purrfect Takes territory. Last week, I said Bears 7-10 or worse. That's a TBD. I think you had the Washington money line. The Eagles came in and got that one. So today, yeah, it was a tough one. Actually, our perfect parlay fell through too. Again, I got my half, but I digress. Today, my take is going to be looking at the Panthers because we finally have a game again this week. Last Thursday, I think it was, we went over our remaining schedule. We had a lot of teams that thought they would blow us out, and a lot of teams that we thought, hey, we might have a chance here. But a recurring theme I saw was we play 5 games against teams with red as one of their primary colors. Obviously, we host the Chiefs this week. We're going to host Tampa Bay. We're going to host Arizona. Then we're going to go to Tampa Bay, to Atlanta. I think we're going to win 2 out of those 5 games. Now, the Chiefs game is going to be rough, but I think we could steal one versus Tampa Bay, like you talked about. And then maybe Atlanta's resting their starters. Who knows? Or maybe Arizona falters on the road, and maybe they're not the team we think they are if they end up losing to the Seahawks or the Rams or more division opponents. So that's what I'm locking in. 2 out of the 5 remaining red team games. We're going to get 2 of them.
Okay. We talked about this last week. I definitely think the Buccaneers are winnable games. The Falcons in week 18, if they've wrapped up the division at 8-8 and they have nothing to play for, they go to 8-9, win the division. We secure another victory. So I think we're kind of in agreement there. We'll see if that comes to pass. Like I said, I think it would be really great for this team to find a way to win 3 games down the stretch. One of the Tampa Bay games, the Atlanta game, and then I think we talked about the Cowboys game. Yeah. Those are winnable games. That's going to propel you into an offseason where you feel good about where this franchise is heading. For me, my perfect take, first off, I'm going to steer clear away from Thursday night. You're not going to hear a peep from me about Thursday, like related bets or takes. Anything that I do say probably can be faded immediately. So in that regard, I'm going to take a long season approach with the Tuesday perfect take. And on Thursday, I'll have something more specific for Sunday. But in regards to today, I think Ja'Marr Chase wins the Triple Crown this year. Currently has the league lead in receptions, has the league lead in yards, and has the league lead in touchdowns. The people behind him, Brock Bowers is at number 2 in receptions. I think it's like 73 and 70. Yards, it's Ja'Marr Chase and Justin Jefferson, who'd have thought. And then for touchdowns, Ja'Marr Chase is at 12, I believe, and Amon-Ra St. Brown is at 9. So he's got a decent lead. He has been putting up ridiculous numbers, and a large part of that is because the Bengals defense can't stop anybody. So Joe Burrow's just got to spam Ja'Marr Chase. I think he pulls it off. He becomes, I believe it would be the 4th player in the Super Bowl era because we have Steve Smith, Cooper Kupp, I think it's Sterling Sharp, and then he would become the 4th. But I think within the NFL as a whole prior to the Super Bowl era, there is another receiver who's got it. So I think he'd become one of 5 then. And I might be missing somebody else, but Jerry Rice had one. He'd become one of 5 and it'd be one of 6 if you look at the NFL as a whole. So disregard what I said prior, but that is my perfect take. Ja'Marr Chase wins the Triple Crown in 2024.
I really like that one, not because I think that it's going to hit, which I do think because, like you said, the Bengals have to keep passing just to stay in games. But it really ties back to how we started the episode with Steve Smith, a Triple Crown winner. And aside from the Cooper Kupp blemish a couple years ago, Steve Smith was the reigning guy. And I think tying that back to the guy we wanted to celebrate today is a good way to end the episode. So as far as myself, as far as Steven, we've been Purrfect Takes. Be sure to follow us on YouTube, Twitter, get your podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, however you listen. And we will be back to talk to you guys on Thursday about a Panthers game. So let's go, keep pounding, and we'll see you next time.
I sub, son.